Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. We got to talk about the Browns' biggest win of the season. Now, we kind of talked about how one of these wins came to be in my video about you're not going to believe exactly how Jerry Judy, that opportunity came to the Browns. Make sure you go watch that video. It's a very fun one. But the biggest win of the Cleveland Browns 2024 season has to do with two trades that they made at the wide receiver position. The Jerry Judy trade and the Amari Cooper trade. Both of these trades have been home runs for Cleveland so far for different reasons, right? And we're going to talk about that in this video. Let's talk about the Jerry Judy trade first. Because the Judy trade came about because Denver wanted to get rid of him. They've been trying to get rid of him for a little while. Also needed to clear about $13 million in cap space. Now, what's ironically and what's funny about this is that the Browns are in the same situation with Greg Newsome. So Greg Newsome's probably going to be somebody's Jerry Judy, or, he could be somebody's Jerry Judy next year. But basically with Judy, his time in Denver, for whatever reason, was toxic, right? Like, it got to a point to where he wasn't his best self in Denver, and Denver wasn't their best self with him. I think they still, even though Judy is living more up to his draft potential now with the Cleveland Browns, I don't think they look at this as like a bad trade on their part. I think they just look at it as something that had to happen, right? And if you're Denver, I think that's a fair way to look at it, given that, you're doing quite fine yourself right now with them on the verge of winning 10 games. But that's why Denver wanted to trade Judy. Makes sense. The Browns wanted to take a flyer on Jerry Judy. It's a player they've tried to trade for a couple of times. And the Browns gave up a 5th-round pick. That pick Denver used to trade up in the 4th round to get Troy Franklin. And then Denver sent Jerry Judy in a 6th-round pick. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that 6th-round pick became Bookie Watson. So now that's the trade. Jerry Judy for a 5th. And that ended up being a really good trade just on the surface of that. But here's where I start to give AB a lot of credit. Because it's one thing to trade for a flyer. Like, let's live in a world where Jerry Judy didn't get that extension, right? And he comes here on an expiring deal and he puts up all these numbers, but he's going to hit free agency at the end of the season. It would be an empty victory because essentially what you would get is 1 year of Jerry Judy before somebody else pays him $28-30 million to go play wide receiver. Because if he puts up 1,300 yards at 25, 26 years old, he's going to get a ton of money. Right, I think Nico Collins. How much did Nico Collins get? Because he had the one good year with the Texans, and then he got infinite money this offseason, I think. Yeah, Nico Collins got 3 years, $72 million, which is an average of about like 24. Jerry Judy probably would have got like 27 million per year because he's a former 1st-round draft pick, a little bit more production than Nico Collins had before the breakout. And then there's a higher upside for him, perceptively, because he is such a high draft pick and highly regarded prospect. So yeah, I think probably 27 million would have been what it took to get him in the free market. And the Browns were never going to pay him that. So if Judy was not signed to this extension, it would have been an empty win. It would have been like, oh, it's cool, but we rented a player to go three and whatever, 4 and whatever, 5 and whatever, 6 and whatever. It would be a pretty empty win. It wouldn't be this thing that we're shouting from the rooftops about. The trade itself isn't what makes it a win for the Cleveland Browns. It's the contract that makes this thing a win. And look, when they signed the contract, a lot of people made the argument that the contract was what made this thing a L for the Cleveland Browns at the time of the trade. Now, I say this with the draft. I'm going to say this with trades. The least valuable analysis on a trade or on a draft pick is the instant analysis on a trade or draft pick. Like, it's nice to know how people felt when it happened, but people who mark something a failure once a trade happens or a success once a trade happens, that's nonsense. We don't know, right? I remember getting into arguments with people about the Houston Texans and what they did to get Will Anderson and CJ Stroud. And a lot of people had this take about how stupid it was. And the Texans are a garbage organization for making that move. And that's a dysfunctional thing to do. And the owner's fingerprints are all over this. And I make the argument like, no, it kind of makes sense, right? If you feel like Will Anderson is that like good of a player and you got the assets to go get him, and you think CJ Stroud is that good and you want to pair those guys up, it makes sense. And if they're both good, nobody's going to care how many draft picks that you gave up, right? Like, people are arguing about, well, they gave up a pick here and they didn't give up the Cleveland pick and they gave up this pick instead. And if you draft good players, nobody cares about all of that, right? I think sometimes when we get into like draft conversations or free agent conversations, we kind of forget that if they play good, nobody cares about how much that contract is. We only, like, the reason we know by heart how much money Deshaun Watson makes is because Deshaun Watson hasn't been good. If Deshaun Watson had been good, nobody would care about that contract. Case in point, how many times do you ever hear anybody bring up Joe Burrow's contract? I don't ever hear anybody bring up Joe Burrow's contract. You know why nobody brings up Joe Burrow's contract? Because Joe Burrow's good. And because Joe Burrow is good, don't nobody care how much money Joe Burrow is making. He's making like $60 million. Don't nobody care. I don't know how much a year Pat Mahomes is making. Like, look at all the top quarterbacks. I don't know how much they make because they're good and they're worth it, right? How much does Justin Herbert make? I don't know. I don't care. He's worth it. How much does Lamar Jackson make? I don't know. I don't care. He's worth it, right? We get so caught up in it. And that's what happened with the Jerry Judy thing. The Browns signed him to this contract, and everybody made a declaration that moment. And it's important to remember this is how this works, right? Everybody made a declaration of failure or success that specific moment. And then the season happened, and we found out that getting Jerry Judy for like $17 million a year annually, what was the actual numbers for the contract? 3 years, $52 million, 17.5 APY. And a lot of this is on incentives, but you have to imagine he hit a good amount of them. And all of a sudden, you're looking at that contract, and the Browns have saved themselves $30 million over 3 years, right? Because he would have gone for like, what, 27? You wouldn't have been able to keep him. And now it makes a ton of sense. If you're going to trade for Jerry Judy because you think he's a flyer and you believe in him, well, you got to sign him for it to make sense if he's in the contract year. Because all of a sudden, that trade would have made no sense without that contract. If you would have just rented him for a year, it would have been a success but a failure at the same time because you would have only had him for 1 year. That's the underrated part about that trade that I don't think a lot of people like contextualize. The contract is what makes that a massive win for the Cleveland Browns. Like, the trade itself is a good trade. I think Denver got what they wanted. They wanted to free up the cap space. They got the extra draft pick, and they used that extra draft pick to draft somebody in Troy Franklin, who ended up being a decent player for them. Denver didn't lose. The Browns didn't lose. But the reason the Browns didn't lose is not just because Jerry Judy's having a breakout, but Jerry Judy's under contract now for 2 more years. It's a big win for the Cleveland Browns. Huge, huge. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Understanding this win and understanding the reaction to it and how people like to determine if something's going to succeed or fail the moment it happens should kind of flow into how we look at this offseason. Because the reality of the Cleveland Browns is that they have some money to do some things, but they don't have money to go out and get players that's going to get universal praise from everybody. They have money to buy low and sell high. And there are going to be some players that the Browns are going to have to buy low on and hope they can sell high. Devin Bush is a great example of this. If you watch this channel, you know I was against Devin Bush ever playing. I think I said one time, on my mama, he can't play linebacker. Well, the Browns bought low on Devin Bush. And guess what? I was wrong. Devin Bush has been playing well. I'm going to do a video about this at the end of the season, but this season, more than any other, has humbled me in a way because there's been a lot of things that I turned my nose at entirely in this offseason that ended up working out for other teams. Bo Nix, drafting him in the first round. I thought that was ridiculous. Ended up working out. They're signing Russell Wilson. Oh, I turned my nose up at that automatically. Like, what the hell are they thinking? Steelers done lost it. Ended up working out for them. Always important to leave room for the idea that you might not be right, that your gut feeling about that might be wrong, that your analysis of that situation might be flawed. So that's why I'm going into this offseason willing to look into options that I would have turned my nose up to last year, because I saw a lot of people do that, and maybe we didn't consider some options that could have been helpful for the Cleveland Browns. Maybe we turned our nose up at some things that, hey, might have helped us. Maybe the Browns themselves turned their nose up at things that could have helped them. So that's why I'm not willing to just write off, Kirk Cousins' usefulness to this team. Did that last year with Russ. Did that last year with Bo Nix. No, I'm not going to write it off, right? Same thing with some of these draft prospects. It's easy to write guys off. It's easy to ride on your high horse and act like you're right about everything before you have to prove it. It's easy to have a strong opinion when it's not time to back it up. So I want to look at more moves, more things, more thoroughly to see if it actually does make sense, right? Instead of going with my initial analysis saying, oh, that doesn't make sense, don't do it. I'm going to consider everything, especially when it comes to the Browns. And the success of the Jerry Judy trade is part of why I feel that way. Not because I didn't think Jerry Judy would be successful here, but I definitely didn't think he'd be a 1,000-yard wide receiver. Thought that contract had the potential for disaster. But hey, so far, so good with that contract. Another trade that ended up being a huge win for the Cleveland Browns is getting a third for Amari Cooper. Now, I don't know how much of y'all been paying attention to Amari Cooper in Buffalo, but it's not going amazing with Amari Cooper in Buffalo. I know you saw like a couple highlights here and there, but Amari Cooper, since he's joined the Buffalo Bills, has 231 yards and 1 touchdown. I'm going to bring up some stats here. And these stats are what the Browns wide receivers have done since Amari Cooper has been traded. Amari Cooper's last game in Cleveland was against Philadelphia. So since joining the Buffalo Bills, again, Amari Cooper, 231 yards and 1 touchdown. Cedric Tillman, who's only played in 5 games since the Amari Cooper trade, has 330 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's more than Amari Cooper. Elijah Moore has 385 yards and 1 touchdown. Jerry Judy has 804 yards and 3 touchdowns. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Jerry Judy has 1 game that is way more productive than everything that Amari Cooper has done since he's gotten to Buffalo. The Browns are missing nothing from not having Amari Cooper. And they got really solid compensation for him. Amari Cooper was on an expiring deal, and you basically got a free 3rd-round pick. Now, you paid some money when it comes to dead cap for that 3rd-round pick, but you got solid compensation. You didn't miss anything. It actually allowed you to open up the wide receiver room a little bit, and it feels like the receivers got better once we got rid of Amari Cooper, who just wasn't playing good this season. I don't know what happened to him. Maybe he had a bad offseason. Maybe he'll be better next year, but it feels like his usefulness had ran its course, and the Browns made the move on it. And kudos to the Browns because they were way ahead of this before anybody else. Remember, they tried to trade Amari Cooper to get in Brandon Ayuk. So when it comes to wide receiver, Andrew Berry has made some really, really good moves. And again, some of these moves were panned at the time, right? Like I remember getting pushback when I said, I like the Amari Cooper compensation. People were like, 3rd-round pick, watch Amari Cooper have 1,000 yards for him. No, I think the Browns had the right read on Amari Cooper, that he did not have it anymore, and they made the right decision. The Browns this year, the organization and the fan base, we can't afford to be super snobbish about the kind of names you might have to bring in, especially around the quarterback position. Like the Browns have to be in a position to buy low and sell high if they want to be able to get themselves out of this, and they have to do it well. There's going to be some moves that the Browns make that the internet's going to roast. It's just going to be what it is. Doesn't mean that move is an immediate failure. Doesn't mean that move's going to be an immediate success either, right? Some of these moves they're going to make, like, maybe they take a flyer on a player here or there, and that player doesn't succeed. Maybe they take a flyer and that player does succeed. The Browns need to get younger and better, which means they're going to have to take some flyers on some draft prospects that maybe haven't hit with their team right now. They're going to have to take some flyers on some players who are willing to play on a minimum to kind of get another opportunity to show the NFL what they have. They're going to have to buy low and hope to sell high. But that's what this season is about. And that's what the two biggest wins of the Cleveland Browns season have been about, right? They bought low with Jerry Judy, and they got a big win off of that. And they sold high on Amari Cooper, and they got a big win out of that. And then hopefully Jerry Judy becomes the number one wide receiver for this team. Hopefully that third-round pick becomes something for this Browns team. But that's the path forward. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.